The rain in Seattle did not simply fall, it felt as though it were trying to erase the city, washing away the grime and the grief in equal measure. I stood by the window of my study, watching the gray water streak against the glass, creating distorted reflections of a room that suddenly felt too large, too quiet, and suffocatingly empty. My eldest son, Julian, had been buried only 24 hours ago. The soil on his grave was likely turning to mud in this downpour, a thought that sent a fresh wave of nausea rolling through my stomach. At 65, I had expected to lose my eyesight, my mobility, perhaps even my memories, but I had never expected to outlive my firstborn. Julian was 40, a man of rigid health, a marathon runner, a cybersecurity expert who treated his body like a temple, and yet the coroner said his heart had simply stopped, sudden cardiac arrest. A clinical term for a tragedy that had ripped the floor out from under my life. The phone rang, shattering the silence. It was a jarring, mechanical sound that made me jump. I stared at it, debating whether to answer. I assumed it was another well-wisher, another distant relative offering platitudes that tasted like ash. Finally, out of habit more than desire, I picked up the receiver. "Mrs. Thorne, this is Marcus Sterling." The name registered instantly. Marcus was the CEO of the tech firm where Julian had worked for 15 years. He was a man of few words, severe and imposing, someone who rarely made personal calls. "Mr. Sterling, I appreciate the flowers you sent," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "Mrs. Thorne, listen to me very carefully," Marcus interrupted, his voice low and vibrating with an urgency that froze the blood in my veins. "I am not calling to offer condolences. I have discovered something regarding Julian that you need to know immediately. It is a matter of life and death." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. "What are you talking about?" "I cannot discuss this over an open line. You need to come to my office. Now, do not tell anyone where you are going, not your friends, and absolutely not your son Caleb or his wife. Do you understand me?" The mention of my younger son Caleb confused me. Caleb had been my rock for the last 3 days. He and his wife, Vanessa, had organized the funeral, handled the catering, and fielded the calls. Why would I hide this from him? "Mr. Sterling, Caleb is staying here with me. I can't just leave without. If you value your safety, and if you want to know the truth about why Julian is in a coffin, you will get in your car and drive to my private garage entrance immediately. Trust no one, Evelyn. Just come." The line went dead. I stood there, the receiver humming in my hand, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The grief that had paralyzed me for days was suddenly replaced by a cold, sharp spike of adrenaline. I grabbed my coat and keys. Downstairs, the house was quiet. Caleb and Vanessa were in the guest wing. I could hear the faint murmur of the television. I slipped out the side door into the pouring rain, the cold wind biting at my cheeks, and got into my car. As I drove toward downtown Seattle, the skyline looming like jagged teeth against the gray clouds, I had no idea that I was driving away from the life I knew and into a nightmare that would test the limits of a mother's love. The Sterling Tech building was a fortress of glass and steel piercing the overcast sky. I bypassed the main lobby as instructed and parked in the executive garage, where a security guard was already waiting for me. He escorted me in silence to a private elevator that ascended rapidly, my ears popping as we shot toward the penthouse office. When the doors slid open, Marcus Sterling was waiting. He looked older than I remembered, his face drawn and pale. He didn't offer a hand to shake. Instead, he ushered me into his office and locked the heavy oak door behind us. He pressed a button on his desk, and the glass walls of the office turned opaque, frosting over to block out the world. "Marcus, you are frightening me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "What is going on? Why all this secrecy?" "Evelyn, please sit down." I sank into the leather chair, clutching my purse as if it were a shield. Marcus walked around his desk but didn't sit. He paced, looking like a man burdened with a terrible secret. "Julian came to me 2 months ago," Marcus began, stopping to look me in the eye. He had found anomalies in some accounts he was auditing. Not company accounts, Evelyn. He was looking into external servers linked to high-risk gambling syndicates. He found a trail of debt that was staggering. Millions of dollars. I shook my head, confused. Julian didn't gamble. He barely drank coffee. It wasn't Julian's debt, Marcus said softly. It was Caleb's. The name hung in the air between us. Caleb, my baby. The charming, charismatic real estate developer who always had a new project, a new vision, a new dream. That's impossible, I defended instinctively. Caleb has his own firm. He's successful. He and Vanessa just bought a vacation home in Aspen. It's all smoke and mirrors, Evelyn. Caleb's firm has been insolvent for 3 years. He's been borrowing from loan sharks, the kind of people who don't file lawsuits when you don't pay. They break legs, or worse. Julian discovered that Caleb owes nearly $4 million to a syndicate based in Macau, and they gave him a deadline. I felt the room spin. $4 million? But what does this have to do with Julian? Julian confronted Caleb, Marcus explained. He tried to get him to go to the police. Caleb refused. He said he had a plan to get the money, a plan that involved liquidating a major asset. What asset? I asked, though a cold dread was already pooling in my stomach. You, Evelyn. Your estate. Your portfolio. This house. I sat back, unable to breathe. My assets were in a trust. Caleb couldn't touch them unless you were declared mentally incompetent. Marcus finished my thought, his voice grim. Julian found emails between Caleb and a neurologist named Dr. Aris. They were discussing a diagnosis for early-onset dementia. They were plotting to put you under a conservatorship, Evelyn. Caleb would gain legal control over your finances. He planned to sell everything, put you in a state-funded facility, and use your life savings to pay off his debts. No, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. He's my son. He loves me. He's been taking care of me. He's been drugging you, Marcus said bluntly. The words were a physical blow. I stared at him. Julian found the chemical analysis. The vitamins Vanessa has been giving you? The tea she insists you drink every night? They contain scopolamine and benzodiazepines, drugs that induce confusion, memory loss, and compliance. They've been manufacturing your dementia, Evelyn, so that when they bring you before a judge, you look the part. I thought about the last few months, the fog in my brain, the way I kept losing my keys, the way I would forget conversations Caleb claimed we'd had. I had thought it was age. I had thought I was fading away. But Julian, I stammered. Julian is dead. Did they kill him? Did Caleb kill his brother because he found out? Marcus looked at the door to his private washroom. He took a deep breath. No, Evelyn, they didn't kill him. The washroom door opened. A man stepped out. He was pale, dressed in simple clothes, his eyes red-rimmed and haunted. But he was breathing. He was standing. He was alive. Julian. The scream that tore from my throat was primal. I lunged out of the chair, my legs shaking so hard I nearly collapsed. Julian rushed forward and caught me, and we fell to the floor together, weeping. I touched his face, his hair, his shoulders, needing to verify his existence with every tactile sense I possessed. He was warm. He smelled of the same cedarwood soap he had used since college. Mom, I'm so sorry, he sobbed into my shoulder. I'm so sorry. I pulled back, gripping his face between my hands. We buried you. I saw you in the casket. A body double, Marcus interjected gently from above us. A John Doe from the morgue who matched Julian's physical description. We pulled strings. It was illegal, dangerous, and necessary. Why? I cried, looking at Julian. Why put me through this hell? Because if I had just disappeared, Caleb would have known I was on to him, Julian said, his voice cracking. He would have accelerated his timeline. He would have hurt you, Mom. I needed him to think he was safe. I needed him to think the only obstacle standing between him and your money was gone. It was the only way to catch him in the act. We needed concrete proof of the conspiracy to commit fraud and the poisoning. I sat on the floor of that executive office, holding the hand of my resurrected son, and listened as he dismantled the image of my family. He showed me the evidence. The text messages where Caleb called me the old bag and complained that I was taking too long to lose my mind. The emails, where Vanessa discussed which nursing home was the cheapest, joking that I wouldn't know the difference once the drugs fully kicked in. The betrayal was not a sharp knife. It was a dull, rusted saw, grinding back and forth against my soul. My son, whom I had nursed through fevers, whose tuition I had paid, whose failures I had cushioned with unconditional love, looked at me not as a mother, but as a harvest, a resource to be consumed. "We have enough to arrest him now, right?" I asked, wiping my eyes. "We do," Marcus said. "But the police want to catch them in the final act. They want to catch Dr. Aris signing the fraudulent competency evaluation. It's scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, isn't it?" I nodded slowly. Caleb had told me it was just a checkup, a routine scan to see why I was so tired lately. "You have to go back, Mom," Julian said, squeezing my hand. "You have to go back to that house and pretend you don't know. You have to let them take you to that appointment." "I don't know if I can," I whispered. "I don't know if I can look at him and not scream." "You are the strongest woman I know," Julian said fiercely. "You built a career in architecture when men told you to be a secretary. You raised us alone after Dad died. You can do this, for us, for the future." I drove home in a daze. The rain had stopped, leaving the world slick and shining under the streetlights. When I entered the house, the warmth should have been comforting, but it felt like walking into a spider's web. "Mom?" Caleb's voice came from the kitchen. "You've been gone for hours. We were worried." I walked into the kitchen. Caleb was leaning against the counter, holding a glass of wine. Vanessa was chopping vegetables. They looked so normal, so beautiful, a golden couple. I got lost, I lied, channeling every ounce of confusion I had truly felt over the last few months. I went to the grocery store, but then I couldn't remember why I was there. I just sat in the parking lot for a long time. Caleb exchanged a quick, dark glance with Vanessa. He walked over and put an arm around my shoulders. "It's okay, Mom. You've been under a lot of stress with Julian's passing. It's normal to be a little scrambled." Vanessa approached, her smile tight and predatory. "Here, Evelyn, drink your tea. It will help you relax." She handed me the mug. The steam rose from it, smelling of chamomile and betrayal. I took it with trembling hands. "Thank you, dear," I said. "I'll take it up to my room. I'm exhausted." I climbed the stairs, feeling their eyes on my back. Once inside my bedroom, I locked the door. I went into the bathroom and poured the tea down the sink, watching the pale liquid swirl away. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked haunted but clear. The fog was lifting because I knew the source of the mist. I couldn't sleep. I knew that downstairs, in the guest wing, my executioners were sleeping soundly. Around 2 a.m., I crept out of my room. I needed to know. Julian had shown me the digital evidence, but I needed to see the physical reality of it. I went to the study where Caleb had set up his temporary workspace. I riffled through his briefcase, my heart pounding in my throat. I found a folder marked E.T. Estate. Inside were the architectural plans for my house, marked up with renovation ideas for a quick sale. There were brochures for a facility called Shady Pines, a state-run warehouse for the indigent elderly. And there was a notepad with handwriting I recognized as Vanessa's. Timeline: Nov 15. Funeral: Nov 17. Dr. Aris Eval. Nov 20. File for conservatorship. Deck 1. List house. Projected net. $5. 2M. They had itemized my life. They had put a calendar date on my destruction. I took photos of the documents with the burner phone Julian had given me, my hands shaking so hard the images were blurry at first. I put everything back, exactly as I found it, and retreated to my room. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, mourning the living son as much as I had mourned the dead one. The Caleb I loved had died a long time ago, replaced by this desperate stranger. The next morning, the day of the appointment, the air in the house was thick with tension. Caleb was overly solicitous, helping me down the stairs, checking my shoes were tied. Vanessa was practically vibrating with anticipation. "This doctor is a miracle worker, Mom," Caleb said as he drove us toward the clinic. "He's going to help you get your clarity back." I looked out the window, watching the familiar streets pass by. I'm sure he will, son. The clinic was in a nondescript medical building. Dr. Eris was a small, nervous man with sweaty palms. He led us into an examination room. Caleb and Vanessa insisted on staying. Now, Mrs. Thorne, Dr. Eris began, clicking a pen nervously. Your son tells me you've been experiencing severe cognitive decline. Forgetting names, getting lost in your own home, paranoia? I looked at Caleb. He was watching me with a mask of concern that didn't reach his eyes. Yes, I said softly. I feel, confused. Dr. Eris nodded, not even looking up from his clipboard. Typical presentation. I have the papers here for the competency hearing. Based on my observation, it is clear that you are no longer fit to manage your own affairs. He pushed a document toward me. I need you to sign this acknowledgement that I have explained the diagnosis to you. I picked up the pen. The room was silent. I could hear Caleb's breathing hitch. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. I looked at the paper, then I looked at Caleb. Do you remember when you were 6, Caleb? I asked quietly. He blinked, startled by the deviation from the script. What? Mom, just sign the paper. You fell out of the tree in the backyard. You broke your arm. You were screaming. I held you for 4 hours in the emergency room. I told you I would never let anything bad happen to you. Mom, please, he hissed, his patience fraying. I kept that promise, I said, my voice hardening, shedding the feigned frailty. But you broke yours. I dropped the pen. I'm not signing this, Dr. Eris. And you should probably know that the medical board is already reviewing your license. Caleb stood up, his face turning a violent shade of red. What are you talking about? Mom, you're having an episode. Doctor, give her a sedative. Vanessa lunged forward. Give me the pen, you senile old. The door to the examination room burst open. Police, stay where you are. Uniformed officers flooded the small room. Caleb stumbled back, knocking over a tray of instruments. Commander Jenkins, a stern woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped forward. Caleb Thorne, Vanessa Thorne, Dr. Eris. You are all under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and the distribution of controlled substances. This is insane, Caleb shouted, struggling as an officer grabbed his wrists. My mother is crazy. She doesn't know what she's saying. She thinks her dead son is talking to her. He's not dead, Caleb. The voice came from the hallway. Caleb froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure. Julian stepped into the room. He looked tired, but he stood tall. He looked at his brother with a mixture of pity and disgust. Hello, little brother. Caleb's legs gave out. He slumped against the exam table, staring at Julian as if he were seeing a ghost. No. I saw you. I saw the body. You saw what you wanted to see, Julian said coldly. You were so eager to get your hands on Mom's money that you didn't look too closely, did you? Vanessa began to scream, a high-pitched feral sound, blaming Caleb, blaming the doctor, blaming everyone but herself. The officers dragged them out. As Caleb was led past me, handcuffed, he stopped. He looked into my eyes, searching for the mother who would always bail him out, always fix it. Mom, please. They'll kill me in prison. The loan sharks. You have to help me. I looked at him, my heart breaking into 1,000 irreparable shards. I stepped closer, placing a hand on his cheek. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. I am helping you, Caleb, I whispered. I'm stopping you from becoming a murderer. He was led away. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the hum of the fluorescent lights and the quiet sobbing of a mother who had lost 2 sons in 2 very different ways. The trial was a media circus. The story of the resurrected brother and the gaslight plot was irresistible to the press. I had to testify against my own child. I had to sit on the stand and detail how he had poisoned me. I had to listen to the recordings of him calling me a burden. Caleb was sentenced to 12 years in a federal penitentiary. Vanessa got 8, Dr. Eris lost his license and went away for 5. After the sentencing, I couldn't go back to the house in Seattle. It was a haunted place now. Every room held a memory that had been tainted. I sold it. I sold the furniture, the art, everything. Julian and I moved to Oregon, to a small town called Cannon Beach. We bought a house overlooking the ocean, a place where the waves crashed against the haystack rock with a violence that felt appropriate. The first few years were quiet. Julian struggled with the trauma of his fake death. He had nightmares about being buried alive. He drank too much. We were two wounded animals, licking our wounds in a beautiful cage. I spent my days walking the beach, letting the cold wind numb the ache in my chest. I thought about Caleb every day. I wondered if he was cold. I wondered if he was eating. A mother's love is a curse in that way. It does not switch off simply because the child is a monster. 3 years into his sentence, the letters started coming. At first, I burned them unopened. I watched the envelopes turn to ash in the fireplace, imagining the words curling up in smoke. I wasn't ready. Julian wasn't either. He forbade me from mentioning Caleb's name in the house. But the letters kept coming, once a month, punctual. In the 4th year, I opened one. Dear Mom, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted to tell you that it rained today in the yard, and it smelled like the pavement in Seattle, and I remembered the day you taught me how to ride a bike. I am sorry, not because I got caught, but because I broke the only pure thing I ever had. Your trust. It was short. No requests for money. No excuses about the loan sharks. I didn't reply. Months passed. The letters changed tone. They became less about guilt and more about discovery. Caleb wrote about a program he had joined. He was using his business degree to teach other inmates basic financial literacy. He was helping men who had never held a bank account understand how to save, how to budget. I helped a kid named Marcus today, he wrote. He's 22. He didn't know what compound interest was. He wants to open a bakery when he gets out. We made a business plan. For the first time in my life, Mom, I'm building something real, not just moving money around to hide a deficit. I showed that letter to Julian. He read it, his jaw tight. It's a con, Mom. He's working an angle. It's what he does. Maybe, I said. Or maybe he's finally hitting rock bottom and finding out what the foundation looks like. I started writing back. Brief, impersonal notes, describing the weather, the garden. It was a lifeline, thin as a spider web, stretching across the abyss between us. 7 years passed. Caleb was up for parole. He had been a model prisoner. He had reorganized the prison library, started a GED tutoring program, and kept his nose clean. I went to the hearing. Julian refused to go, but he drove me to the gates and waited in the car. When I saw Caleb, I barely recognized him. The soft, expensive puffiness of his face was gone, replaced by hard angles and graying hair. He looked older than his years. When he saw me, he didn't smile. He lowered his head. The board asked me if I opposed his release. I stood up. My hands were shaking, just as they had all those years ago in Dr. Eris's office. My son did terrible things, I said, my voice steady. He tried to destroy me, but I believe that justice is not just about punishment. It is about restoration. I believe the man sitting there is not the man who tried to hurt me. I believe he has paid his debt. Caleb wept, silent, shaking sobs that racked his entire body. He was released 2 weeks later. He didn't come to Oregon. He moved to a halfway house in Boise, Idaho. He got a job at a landscaping company, hauling mulch and digging ditches. Hard, physical labor. He sent me checks, $50 here, $100 there, restitution. I put every single one in a savings account for him. 2 years after his release, Julian and I were sitting on our deck, watching the sunset. The ocean was purple and gold. He's coming to visit, I said. Julian stiffened. I know. You told me. Are you going to be here? Julian sighed, a long, weary sound. He picked up his beer and looked at the horizon. I don't know if I can forgive him, Mom. I really don't. He stole years of our lives. I know, I said. But kintsugi. Julian looked at me. The Japanese pottery thing? Yes. When a bowl breaks, they don't throw it away. They mend the cracks with gold lacquer. They believe the piece is more beautiful for having been broken. We are broken, Julian. We will never be the pristine family we were before. But maybe, just maybe, we can be something else, something with gold in the cracks. Caleb arrived the next day. He drove a battered pickup truck. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps, afraid to come up. I walked down to him. He smelled of pine needles and sweat. "Mom," he choked out. I didn't say anything. I just pulled him into a hug. He felt solid. He felt real. He held on to me like a drowning man. Julian came out onto the porch. He didn't come down the stairs. He stood there, watching us, his face unreadable. Caleb looked up at his brother. "I'm sorry, Julian. I know that's not enough, but I'm sorry." Julian didn't smile. He didn't offer forgiveness, but he nodded. It was a start. We sat for dinner that night. The conversation was stilted, awkward. We talked about the landscaping business. We talked about the weather. But we were sitting at the same table. Life is not a movie. There was no grand musical swelling, no magical moment where the past was erased. The betrayal would always be there, a scar running down the center of our lives. But as I looked at my two sons, one who had returned from the dead and one who had returned from the dark, I realized that love is not blind. Love sees the flaws, the cracks, the terrible mistakes, and it chooses to stay anyway. Caleb eventually started his own small business, honest work this time. He met a woman, a school teacher who knew his past and accepted it. Julian found peace in painting, of all things, trading his computer screens for canvases. And I remained the keeper of the story. I learned that family is not a static thing. It is a living, breathing organism that can be wounded, that can get sick, but that can also heal. It leaves scars, yes. But sometimes, if you look closely, those scars shine like gold.